The upwards potential of IPv4 as an investment asset is potentially 100 or 1,000 times fold. The suppression of value of IPv4 is actually a collective suppression of valuation of all ISP worldwide. Why would we allow such suppression of our business value? My name is Lu Heng. I'm the CEO and founder of LARUS Limited, a global leading IP solution provider. Today, I'm going to talk about something very important to your business: the value of IPv4 addresses. As we all know, in the past decade, due to the exhaustion of free pools with regional internet registries, the value of IPv4 has been constantly rising. Only very few of us has actually realized how much it has been raised. Today, the value of IPv4 is already represent a significant portion of market capitalizations of many large telecoms. It's important to understand how does it happen, why does it happen, and what's the future of the value of IPv4 in my opinion. To understand this, let's go back to the original of IPv4. What is IPv4? It's just a number limited by 2 power 32, i.e. 32-bit of numbers. That means it's in total 4.3 billion IPv4 addresses in existence. But there's also a lot of space which is not actually usable. For example, the local loop IPs, the internal network IPs, and the so-called Class E IPs, which was reserved for future use. All of those IPs, which excluded from general public use in the public network, means actual usable IPs is barely a bit more than 3 billion IPs. And we all know there's more than 3 billion devices on the planet Earth at this point. That's why the scarcity of IPv4 was created. So a bit more than a decade ago, the first ever IPv4 deal was made by Microsoft and Nortel, valued each IP address at $11 per IP. In the past 15 years or so, the value has gradually raised up to the point of $50 or even $60 per IP. But if we look at IPv4 addresses as what it truly is in commercial terms, you can't be online without an IP address. Therefore, it is what we call a service enabler. It's just like a shop in a city center. Without that location, you can't do your business. The same applies to IPv4 addresses. Without IPv4, you can't be online. And as cost of a service enabler in general, across all city centers in the world, from Manhattan to Hong Kong to Singapore to London, it's generally about 30% of revenue of that shop generated. But today, if we look at the actual cost of IPv4 addresses, it's still far below that. In fact, it's so much below that it represents an insignificant portion of the cost of the infrastructure. Let's take a normal cloud server, which can be enabled by one single IPv4 addresses to be connected online. A single cloud server would cost you somewhere around $200 or $300 per month for an average spec. But how much an IP address actually costs in that $200 or $300? If you go to my website, larus.net, you'll find an IP is costing somewhere between 25 cents to 50 cents per month. That is only 0.1% value which is enables the service delivered to. Imagine a shop in Manhattan only costs 0.1% of its shop's revenue for the rent. How cheap that would be. It simply means that the upwards potential of IPv4 as an investment asset is potentially 100 or 1,000 times fold. But even at this extremely undervalued situation, today the market value, the asset value of IPv4 addresses already represents somewhere between 5 to 30% of market capitalization of some telecoms in the world. In the link below this video, you will find some of the examples of the data which we calculated. And you feel free to calculate your own company, how much the value of your IPv4 worth, and what does it represent the percentage of your company valuation. simply by input the number of IPs in the calculator and the presumed company valuation either based on PS, price to sales, or PE, price to earning, you will have your answer. And if you imagine IPv4 has been realized its true value, which let's say 30% value of the services delivered in the infrastructure world, which means by today's standard 100 times higher than today's price, how much uplift to the valuation of your company. And some of you might wonder why the IP address is so much undervalued. It's really come down to two reasons. The first, liquidity. Globally, IP addresses were worth somewhere around $200 billion, but the annual transfer volume is less than $2 billion. So it means the liquidity of IPv4 as an asset is less than 1% per year. If you look at any stock in the stock market, any well-traded stock, the daily liquidity is more than 1% at most of the time. And the liquidity brings correct valuation. No asset can be fairly valued without sufficient liquidity. And why the liquidity is so hard and why the liquidity is so limited? Because the current policy set up in the IPv4 world, mostly by the techies. There are transfer holding period, which means once you buy an IP address, you can't retransfer to somebody else for a number of years. Then there's so-called need test, which means aside from putting the money down, you also need to demonstrate if you actually need those IP addresses to the regional internet registries. One would wonder if someone has already put down a few $1 million to buy an asset that automatically in a capitalist world, you need it, right? That money itself is demonstrative of need. But sadly, that's not the case. Today, the policy set up with regional internet registries, they require you to demonstrate to them that you need those IP addresses. Yes, you guessed it right. Set up with bureaucratic process is potentially vulnerable to corruptions, and it might happening right now. And lastly, come to the ownership problem. The $1 million you spend, the number you just bought, those IPv4 address you seem entitled to use. The internet registry also have policies require you to hold the IPv4 address once you bought it while you own those IPs. You can't sell them. Regional Internet Registry says it's not yours to own. Somehow magically, they believe the single service agreement you signed with them entitles them to own the entire internet. That is not right. But fortunately for us, regional internet registry are based on its communities, and you are those communities. So you need to take the decision to engage in the community, to raise your voice, to let your executive team know that how important to free up the liquidity and recognize ownership of IPv4 addresses. So the liquidity is limited by primarily the policy obstacles, which means the compulsory holding period and so-called additional need test. And secondly, the liquidity is also limited by the inefficiency of the transfer market. An average transfer of IPv4 block takes somewhere between 3 to 6 months. It takes longer to buy a registration of numbers than buy an entire house, for example, in most of the countries. The suppression of value of IPv4 is actually a collective suppression of valuation of all ISP worldwide. You, me, we are IP owners. Why would we want our business to be fairly valued? Why would we allow such suppression of our business value? I think the answer is simple. We should bring up the correct value of IPv4 address in the future. We need you as business owner, as part of the community, to act collectively, to remove policy obstacles, to ask for efficiency of our operations, to allow IPv4 to be fairly valued in real time. This is potentially the biggest wealth generation of our industry. Traditionally, the infrastructure industry, while we do all the heavy lifting of creating the global internet, but we only share a very small pie of the collective value the internet generates. It's time for a change. It's time for us to take the real value and the real share of the collective pie of the internet. It's the time for we all act together to have our business appreciated by the true capital market. Let's act together. Let's join the community. I know many of you have not heard of regional internet registries. Many of you have left that job to your technical department. But at this point, since it represents a significant portion of your business valuation, it's time for you, the shareholder, the board, the executive management to step forward, to participate in the policies, in the decision-making of the registration database for the IPv4 addresses. If you have any questions, and if you want to participate, please reach out to me or reach out to NIS, which they are championing to allow you to own the IP addresses. It's time to act. Thank you. Thank you very much. I see you next video.